Good morning, people. Foggy morning down here on the river. I was just sitting outside. It's actually quite warm, listening to the eagles build a nest on the other side of the river in the dark. They're quite chatty. It's been fun. Same eagles that you may have seen out there trying to hunt the ducks. They're obviously getting started in their whole family rearing. Anyway, I thought I would get into a topic. I'm going to stick my neck out a little bit here. This will get into material that may not be super comfortable, but let's just have the conversation. I know that a lot of people struggle with kind of wrapping their head around what it really in fact means to adopt either this I, thou, or I, it form of relating that we get from Buber that I talk so much about. And of course, again, this idea isn't unique to Buber. It's just that I like to credit people where they put their ideas together coherently, and I would name him as my source for that kind of thinking. I too, like many of you, found the idea extremely uncomfortable, and in fact, I rejected it when I first encountered Buber in my early 20s in university. I expect that many of you will too. But I want to talk about the nature of relating in some detail this morning because I think it's essential, probably the most essential message that pertains to our circumstance. And I'll just go ahead and get into it. So understand too that I assert, and this might be my own novelty that I interject into the conversation, I assert the idea, and it comes primarily to me from my experience in practical ecology. Practical ecology being distinct from theoretical ecology, meaning that if you claim to be an ecologist, you actually live in a manner that's ecological, I guess, which is unpopular. So practical ecology is the source for this. And that is this, that when we talk about relationship, whether that's to the natural world or to other, or to an intimate partner, or to I don't know, a forest or a rock or an ocean or an ecosystem or your internal subconscious states, and this is again suggestive of Buber, that there's a skill set there, and one has a skill set and a toolkit by which one has learned to interface with other. And the toolkit that one uses to interface with other is used across all scope and all scale and all manner of relating, meaning that if you're the kind of person that relates cruelly to the environment, you will also be the kind of person that relates cruelly to your inner subconscious states, and also the kind of person that relates cruelly to your intimate partner, because cruelty is your toolkit. If you adopt other kinds of tools that are more elegant than cruelty, you will be forced to, in fact, alter the way that you relate to your inner subconscious states, and in fact the natural world, and in fact your intimate partners, because of course, again, the skill of relating from my perspective and what I have learned through my experience is global. You have one set of skills in one toolkit and you apply it across all classes and at all scale, and this is very important. It's not possible to be an individual that it relates destructively with the larger environment and non-destructively internally. You will be destructive in both realms. It's not possible to be a person that is loving with your intimate partner and not loving to other people. You will use the same skill set across all classes, all scales. Another thing that's really important to consider from the get-go as we get into the conversation, that any of this terminology, whether I'm talking about love or relating or I thou or I it or any of the rest, all of these concepts are highly conditioned by perspective, and that perspective can change. As within, so without. There's the metaphor of a dark room with a solitary flashlight in it, and the flashlight looks around the room and declares with complete confidence that the universe is constructed of light. Well, certainly from the perspective of that metaphorical conscious flashlight, it is. But if one were to take a step back and adopt another perspective, the reality would be very different. Now, of course, the reality that the flashlight experiences is real to the flashlight, but that doesn't mean that it's real in terms of its systemic whole. What's the point of that? The point of that is to understand that it is very likely that there are perspectives that may be adoptable that are currently inaccessible simply because one is imprisoned in the moment by one's own, in fact, let's say, true and valid personal experience. It doesn't hurt to adopt a certain amount of modesty and know that while you may be in possession of a good model of everything you've seen, you haven't seen everything. So from that point of view, let's move forward. Now I'm going to frame the discussion in the context of the kind of relating that we see in intimate partners, between intimate partners, which of course at this moment of history is unequivocally messy. Some of you know that I have a background at some point in my past with mentorship of troubled youth and men that have found themselves in tough circumstances. I've kind of stepped away from that, but it's something I'm pretty conversant in. I do follow the conversation out there to some degree because I find it interesting, because it is a useful environment to take a say a water sample of the general zeitgeist of how our civilization currently understands relating. It is pretty disastrous. I think it is interesting to contemplate whether or not it's civilization that has created our very messy and destructive and violent way of relating, or individuals with a very messy and destructive variety of relating have created civilization. That's a rabbit hole that is off the table for now. Basically, the point here is this becomes an accessible frame for us to think about I, thou, and I, it relating, because most of us have had personal experience there for good or ill, and we will viscerally understand what it is that I'm talking about. So, the I-it relationship. Here's a quote from C.S. Lewis, of all people, who has one of the most savage insights that I've ever read into what I-it relating really means. Let's see if it resonates with you. I'm paraphrasing from memory. He goes like this. He says, when the average man says that he wants a woman in his life, what he really means is that he seeks a particular physical pleasure solely, wherein a woman simply happens to be a necessary piece of apparatus. And while that comment is savage and worth taking a little time to kind of let that sink in, if we were to assume for a moment that Lewis is correct in his assertion there, we can anticipate that the average man who holds that view towards women would find it completely rational to undertake certain kinds of strategy in his wooing game in order to capture, in fact, that necessary piece of apparatus. I mean, certainly if what you're looking at capturing is not a person, but a tool or a means towards an end, you're not particularly caring about qualities that you might associate with personhood, right? In fact, the strategies that you might adopt would be those that, in fact, hard select against individuals that might have strong personhood or the ability to relate, because relating is not a thing that he's actually interested in, only satiation, right? So, of course, flinging around high status attractors or flashy cars or material wealth or things of that nature are precisely the things that you would expect would attract an individual who has no interest in relating but satiation as well. We're assuming also here, as is commonly held, in fact it's a trope, that many men find themselves in relationships with women where they too feel that their personhood is completely disrespected, and they find, in fact, that they are only seen as a meal ticket or a source of resource or provider of income or things of that nature. Well, why would we be surprised that we would discover anything else? This kind of interaction is the stuff of sitcoms. It is the standard modus operandi that we are all taught as young people. This is the way that we go about learning our basic tool for interacting with people. This kind of view is normalized. And then we wonder at some point where the possibility for relation exists. Well, it doesn't, because the entire ability to relate has been selected against from the complete start. That was not part of the project from the start. How would we be expecting anything else, in fact, if we have not taken personhood or the acknowledgement of the beingness of other and placed that at the forefront? Why would we expect that we would discover that down the line? In fact, we've created an environment for the relationship, a biome where relationship and beingness simply doesn't exist. Expecting it to be there is unrealistic. So what would the alternative look like? Well, it too is not near as impractical or abstract as you might think. There is a beautiful scene, I think it's in Lila by Persic. It's one of Persic's books, where he describes a situation where he's walking down a dirt road with a native guy on one of the major American Indian reservations. It might be Pine Ridge. And they're kind of having a quiet conversation. And that there's a dog that runs across the road in front of them, and it's kind of an unusual looking dog. And Persic asks his companion there what kind of dog that is. And the native guy responds immediately, "Oh, that's a good dog." And Persic is kind of taken aback by that, because it demonstrates so clearly a cultural bias towards recognizing quality and beingness first. Not that it's a hunting dog, or it's a sheep dog, or it's this kind of dog, or that kind of dog, or this kind of breed or this kind of name. No, the quality is the thing that comes first and foremost to mind when encountering other. Beingness, the essential character of other, is first. Identifiers seeking utility are distal. So I'm hoping that this can provide a little insight into another perspective of looking at relating. Because, again, we come from a culture where our standard way of relating is firmly I-it. It has to be, because it's destructive, exploitive, colonial, expansive. You have to be I-it to do that sort of thing. Otherwise, the pain and the consequences of your actions would destroy you. You have to be cruel to live that way. But that cruelty will permeate its way into every interaction that you have with everything. You might think that what you're seeing there is human nature, in the same way that the flashlight looks around the world and thinks it's a certain way. It is possible to wrest yourself out of that myopic view and practically look at the world differently from another perspective and see that it can be absolutely different. Again, Buber is right. Two essential ways of viewing the world: I-it and I-thou. If you want quality relationships, you have to adopt the I-thou perspective. And really at the core, the I-thou perspective is an essential first-person acknowledgement of the beingness and quality of other first. It's the thing that comes to mind first. It doesn't mean at all that you have to adopt this worldview of curious altruism or self-sacrifice or any of the rest of that. No, that's the perspective of someone who is firmly I-it, trying to be good, which you really can't. That's why it doesn't work. No, an individual that lives I-thou certainly is probably in even better position to find their needs being met. It's just that they care also about how their needs are met. And they would never want their needs to be met because of compulsion or coercion or at the expense of other. They want their needs to be met with other. And of course, to do that, you have to actually be conscious that other has its own being. One of my best friends, who's a very thoughtful fellow, made a quote to me years ago, and like so many of the quotes that have stuck with me, it initially kind of irritated me. And he said this: art is always prescient. Art anticipates the future. Good art, at least. Or maybe not even good art, but popular art, meaning the kind of thing that you see so much of bandied about, somehow resonates with a certain kind of anticipation of a certain kind of future. And it doesn't surprise me at all that there's so much fantasy and fixation with zombie movies, because we are there. I mean, in fact, if you see in the zombie anything, it is the final and end result of a being that is driven by a complete lack of consciousness of the existence of other, and is only driven by a raw drive for satiation. Zombies are where you end up with, or what you end up with, if you pursue I-it to its final conclusion. Now, of course, some of these zombies are more articulate than others, and some of these zombies have more money than others, and some of these zombies are better dressed and have better hygiene than others. But whether they're Bill Gates or whether they're the crack addict that's trundling down the sidewalk towards you in real time, they are not capable of doing anything but desperately trundling towards a particular way of interacting with the world. They do not have the capacity to choose any other way. They are unconscious, they are unable to do it any other way. And they are dragging the mass of these zombies, all of civilization, with them towards, well, the final end result of the consequences of, well, that trajectory. And while that is terrifying, or it should be terrifying, it should also be obvious that there's nothing more important than to choose against that future. And choosing against that future will take a fundamental shift in how we relate to others. And anything that can be done to help us understand that there are more than one perspectives by which we can see the world and relate to other, the more we can elevate that there is a choice in how we adopt relationship, that there are multiple tools by which we can encounter reality. The more we can do that, well, at least the more of us will enjoy relating, and the pleasure and the profundity and the purpose that is inherent in being a first-person participant in the life process in a constructive manner. It's possible. I encourage you to think about it. If you can wrap your head around it, it is a way that will fundamentally shape how you forever see the world. Cheers, people.